I've been teaching English here in Italy for nearly 7 years, and over the course of that time, I have noticed some key behaviours and character traits from my students that sometimes hold them back in their development. And I have to be honest with you, they are transferable to any big life decision and could be holding you back as well from moving to Italy. So let's talk about them. The first aspect is the story you tell yourself. Now, this is something that I see a lot here in Italy because for a lot of people here in Italy, their experience with learning English at school was absolutely terrible. Either the teacher wasn't really interested in the language or didn't have a very good grasp of it themselves, or it was just really poorly taught and only for a very short period of time compared to other subjects. So people often leave school speaking the absolute bare minimum unless they have taken up private courses or, they've put the work in to study themselves. So it's only natural that people are telling themselves the story that English is difficult and that they're never going to learn it and that they cannot speak. Now, here's the problem with this. Our mindset ultimately determines our actions, our behaviours, and really the progress that we're going to make. If we are constantly telling ourselves this narrative that English is difficult, I'm never going to learn it, I can't speak, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can tell you this firsthand because these were the things that I was saying right back at the very beginning when I first moved to Italy and I was dabbling with trying to learn Italian. Oh, it's really difficult. Oh, I can't do it. And ultimately, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I stopped learning at that point. So I know firsthand from my own experience just how powerful your narrative really is. And it's the same with moving to Italy. If your dream is to come and live in this beautiful country, maybe you have a different narrative running in your mind telling you that it's not going to be possible for you. Maybe it's something that you don't deserve. Maybe somebody of your age won't be able to make a success of yourself here in this country. Maybe you're not going to be able to find a job, or you're not going to be able to set your life up, or, what are people going to think about you? This narrative and the story that you are telling yourself is extremely powerful and will ultimately determine whether or not you make your dream or objective, whether it be to learn a language or move to Italy, a reality. So focus in on this. What is the story, the narrative that's running through your mind every time you think about your dream, your goal, or your objective? Because I promise you, if there's an ounce of negativity in that narrative, it's holding you back more than you realize. And it's time to change that story. The second aspect is this something that you really want? Now, the number one excuse that I have heard, and it used to be something that I too would say about my own language learning, is that people don't have time to study English. I didn't have time to study. I'm really busy. I have a lot of commitments, work, family, whatever it may be. Now, I get it. Life is this nowadays, isn't it? We are constantly working. We are constantly hustling. It's very difficult to make time for ourselves. However, if you're really honest with yourself, there are pockets of time that you can find in the day that you could be dedicating towards your language learning. What are you doing when you're traveling to work on your commute? What are you doing when you are on your lunch break? What are you doing when you're having breakfast in the morning? What are you doing when you're on the toilet? Here in Italy, it's like an activity for people. So, maybe you spend quite some time in the bathroom. So what are you doing whilst you're going to the toilet? It's this, isn't it? There are pockets of time that you can find in the day. But the question really is, how much do you want this? How much do you want to learn the language? Because essentially, if you want to do something, you find the time to do it. And it's the same with planning to move to Italy. You're going to have to put the work in if this is something that you want to do. You've got to be researching things. You've got to be watching videos and understanding where in Italy might be best for you and even how you're going to make it happen to begin with. You've got to be learning the language. You've got to be preparing yourself for this big life change. All of it takes time. So how much do you really want this? Are you able to dedicate the time that is necessary to make it happen? Now, I believe with time, it's a funny thing because people often get it skewed. When it comes to working towards a goal or an objective, people think it's all about the quantity of time that they spend, but they forget sometimes actually quality often trumps quantity. Let me explain. Quantity means that you are focused on trying to find large chunks of time in the course of a week to focus on what it is that you're doing, whether it be language learning or whether it be working on your move towards Italy. However, large chunks of time on top of work, family, and life commitments don't often magically appear. And so you need to be focusing more on the quality of the time that you do have. Perhaps you have a 15-minute break in the day, or 20 minutes at the end of the day, or 10 minutes whilst you're having breakfast. Whilst on paper that isn't a large quantity of time, if you can use the time in a really effective way and use that towards your goal or objective, there is quality that suddenly becomes apparent in that time space. And that is what you need to be focused on. I'm such a big advocate for consistency over quantity. Absolutely. Small, consistent actions stack up. It's the principle contained in Atomic Habits. It's an incredible book. Go read it if you're planning to work on a goal or objective, because it will really rationalize your mind about how we form habits and how to make it a reality in the first place. But that aside, small, consistent actions stack up more so than trying to find huge chunks of time. It's something that I've always spoken about on this channel, especially when it comes to language learning, but it's applicable for whatever goal you're working towards. You've got to find the time in small doses throughout the course of a week to work on what it is that you want to work on. And if you're finding some resistance, if you're finding yourself reaching the end of a week having said, I didn't have time to study, or I didn't have time to work on my dream, what's the real issue there? Maybe you don't want it as much as you think you do. And that's a bitter pill to swallow, but you need to face that reality, because if you want something, absolutely, you will find the time to do it. The third aspect is the problem with ego. Now, I read an amazing book last year called The Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And in this book, he deep dives into the concept of ego and how actually, as much as sometimes it can feel like it's helping us, it's really hindering us. It's a fascinating book and I really recommend reading it if you've not already. But where I see this play out in terms of my English students is that people don't understand that when you learn a language, there is a framework, there is a staircase, if you like, that you have to work through in order to get better at the language and to meet the different objectives and, indicators that say that you are a particular level. Now, what some students do is that they position themselves at a higher level than what is really the reality of where they're at. And I think sometimes this is because ego doesn't want them to admit that maybe they are not the level that they first thought they were. And so you will see students pushing through in different levels where they cannot speak, they cannot understand anything, just for them to be able to say to people, I'm an intermediate level of English. But the problem with this is that those students don't make progress because they are not allowing themselves to admit that they haven't got a solid foundation in place. It's that parable of building a house on sand or building it on concrete. If you build a house on sand, ultimately it's going to collapse because you don't have the necessary foundation in place. You don't know the basics. Whereas if you build a house on concrete, it takes longer, but ultimately it's a sturdy structure, and it means that you will progress, learn, develop, and really gain a useful grasp of the language. It's this, isn't it? So many people try to skip the steps, but ultimately at some point they have the realization that it's not really the best way to do this. And it's the same with any big life decision that you have to make, such as moving to Italy. You've got to push your ego to one side. Ego telling you that you know what you have to do, you won't have the same experience as other people, you don't need to listen to them, you've got it sorted, you can do what you want to do. You've got to push that aside a little bit, and you've got to be humble enough to know that you're going to have to make some changes in your life to move here to Italy. I will be speaking about change in my video on Sunday, so stay tuned because it's a very, very important concept. But ultimately, if you want to make a success of your life here in Italy, you will undergo many, many changes and transformations. It's a natural consequence of such a big decision, and it's a beautiful one at that. But some people don't want to consider that, they might have to make some sacrifices in order to make this dream a reality. They might have to live a bit more frugally for, the next 6 to 12 months in order to have the necessary funds for the move itself. They might have to take a pay cut when they move here to Italy in order to be able to fund their dream. Or they may have to do a completely different job, something that, doesn't even represent their qualifications or their skills or whatever it may be, in order to be able to set themselves up in this country. It's this, isn't it? We have to understand sometimes that there is a process in life. It's not to say that you can't skip a few steps, because some people do and they manage very successfully. But if you are, for example, planning to take a really big leap and miss out on a lot of the process, you've got to be aware that you're going to have to put double, triple, quadruple the amount of work in order to fill the gaps that will become apparent as you progress on your journey. whether that be through language learning or whether that be through moving to Italy. So it's a big issue, and I really think ego is something that holds so many people back, and I wish people would just be more humble about their level of the language or about what is involved in moving to Italy so that they can actually make progress, because it is so difficult to see people who are struggling but they don't want to admit it and they don't want to accept it, because ultimately there's nothing you can do, and it's a shame. And so I hope that you can learn to push ego to one side and really be real with yourself about where you're at the moment. And even if moving to Italy, for example, is something that is feasible for you, considering all of the aspects that you must consider when you plan to make this kind of decision. So yes, I think it's time to give ego a kiss on the cheek and wave goodbye, especially when you are working on a big dream goal or objective. The fourth aspect is personal responsibility. This is something that I don't often see many people take in life in general, because it's not easy to admit that maybe you didn't do the work that was necessary, or you were not as good as you thought that you were. Taking personal responsibility is a very humbling experience, but it's also one that will help you ultimately to achieve great things in your life. Now, when it comes to language learning, I see students who perhaps say that, the material wasn't good, or the course wasn't good, or, whatever it may be. And that's the reason why they can't speak the language. When actually, if you dive a bit deeper, it's often because that student didn't study, they didn't put the work in, and they perhaps weren't as invested in the course or whatever it is that they're doing as they could have been. It's so easy to blame an external thing for the fact that you haven't achieved your goals. But I promise you play more of a part in that than you may or may not want to admit. It's the same with moving to Italy. If your dream of moving to Italy isn't plain sailing, if you encounter lots of hurdles and problems along the way, how much are you a part of that problem? What have you done to contribute to that? Because yes, there are so many things that are out of our control, absolutely, but there is more within our control than we realize. Did you properly research what it is that you needed to do? Did you really understand what you were letting yourself in for? Were you invested enough in this dream to really weather the storms when they occur? It's this. Personal responsibility is key to anything in life. And I think when you can take personal responsibility, you make great leaps and bounds in your life, whether it's you're working towards learning a language or you're working towards moving to Italy. Personal responsibility will absolutely change the experience that you have. So don't be afraid to take it. The fifth aspect is finding your own path. Just as in life, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to anything. When it comes to language learning, we are all wired so differently that what works for one student may very well not work for another. And this is it. I see so many students getting stressed because they believed that they needed to study with a textbook, for example, or they needed to study by watching YouTube videos. But what they don't understand is that perhaps those particular ways of study don't resonate with them. Maybe they need to do something a bit more interactive, like include some gamification in their learning. Maybe they need to do something where they are actually putting into practice what it is that they are studying through speech, through talking, for example. It is this. You have to be able to identify, when it comes to language learning, what is your learning style, what resonates with you, what keeps you engaged and focused. Now, it's the same with moving to Italy. You've got to find your own way. What worked for one person may not work for you, but you can learn from people. Success leaves clues. Learn from the people who have done what it is that you want to do, but carve out your own path, because some of the actions that they have taken may not appeal to you or may not resonate with the kind of behaviors that you have, but it doesn't mean you can't learn from them. You've just got to find your own way, and don't be afraid to buck the trend in this sense. Don't be afraid of doing things differently. The end result is what is most important. I hope that these lessons that I have learned from my English students can help you when it comes to moving to Italy. Don't make some of these mistakes. Be open-minded enough to realize that you are going to go on a bit of a journey in terms of your move here to Italy, both physically and literally. And I want you to understand that, the end result will be absolutely worth it if you are willing and want to put in the hard work. And if you're really serious about moving to Italy, then this is the video that I recommend you watch next. I will see you in the next video.